Hey class, welcome back to school. I just wanted to give you guys a little heads up on function rules today. So chapter 13.4, grab your book and let's get started. We're on page 575. I want you to start off with right here being at x is equal to 5. Then if we were to have a function rule that we could plug x into, such as y equals x plus 4, that's our function rule. If we were to plug x equals 5 in there, then we would have y equals 5 plus 4, because our x value was 5. This box right here is like a little function box. You plug a 5 in, what comes out? What's the output? Well, if you plug a 5 in there, 5 plus 4, right? 5 plus 4 gives you a 9. That means that your y value, y is equal to the 5 plus 4, which is the 9. So when you plugged in a 5, to your function box, then you came out with a 9, right? So you plug in a 5, that's your x coordinate, your input, and then out comes a 9 out of your function box. It's like a little box you plug in, bloop, 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 and out comes the 9, right? 5, 9, that's the answer. So if we were to look at example number 1, we're on chapter 13.4, example number 1. If they're telling us the function, they're saying the function is y equals 3x minus 1, right? So if we know the function, then what happens when we plug some of this stuff in? Let's find out. If you plug in a negative 3 into our function box, and this is our function, plug in a negative 3 right there, 3 times negative 3. I'll do it for you right here. 3 times negative 3. If you plug that negative 3 in for your x value, x is always your inputs, and then you multiply it 3 times that negative 3, right? You're going to get negative 9. And when you subtract the 1 from it, you're going to get negative 10. Meaning that when you plug this negative 3 into your function box, out comes a negative 10. So you could write that as a coordinate, negative 3, comma, negative 10. You input it in negative 3, out comes a negative 10. Try that again with a 0. Plug in 0, x equals 0. Plug in a 0 right here into your function box, right? So it's going to be 3 times 0 minus 1. So we plug it in, 3 times 0 minus 1, right? So plug in the 0 into your function box. It goes right in there for your x input. 3 times 0, well 3 times 0 is just 0, right? And then you have to subtract 1 from it, so y equals 0 minus 1, which is going to give you a negative 1. Well, y equals negative 1 right here, that was your output when you plugged in a 0 for your input. X is your input, y is your output. When you do that, you're going to get plugging in a 0, outcoming a negative 1. That's your input, 0, output, negative 1. It's a coordinate, 0, negative 1. We're going to do the same thing but with a 4. So you plug in a 4 to your function box. So you plug in a 4 right there, 3 times 4. 3 times 4 minus the 1. That's 12 minus the 1, which is going to give you y equals 11. So you inputted a 4, you plugged in a 4, got out an 11. That's 4, 11. But these are called function boxes for a reason, because they're functions. So maybe we could call them functions by doing this up here. If you guys can see this right here, it says that we have x equals 5. It's the same problem as this, except for instead of calling it y, I'm saying it's going to be a function, f. The function box says plug x into your function box. When you plug an x into your function box, the x is 5, then you'd be plugging it into this. This is your function. It's the right-hand side that's the function. The x plus 4 is the function. So instead of calling it y, we're calling it f of x. You can exchange the letter y with an f of x every time. So go ahead and put f of x there is equal to 5 plus 4 instead of saying y is equal to 5 plus 4. It's the same thing. You can go back. If you don't like this, go back. Right? So the function box has a 5 plus 4 in it. So the function box has a 9 in it. So when you plug the 5 into your function box, out comes a 9. Just like over here when you plug the 5 into your function box, out came the 9. All right, let's go ahead and have you guys do the skill practice right there on page 576. Go ahead and do that, and we'll come back and get you the answers. So let's check our skill practice. On number 1 there for our skill practice, y equals x plus 5. If we inputted a 0, then out is going to come a 5, because 0 for x, our input, plus 5 is 5. 0 plus 5 gives you 5. But what happens when you plug in a negative 4? Negative 4 going in for your input, your x value. Negative 4 plus 5 is just going to give you a 1. So plug in a negative 4, out comes a 1. How about you plug a 9 into your function box, right? Plug a 9 into your function box for x, out's going to come a 14, right? Plug a 9 in here. So 9 plus 5 is 14. My y value is 14. So x is 9. Plug it in. Out comes 14 for y. You can do the same thing for number 2, where you have a different function box this time. You're going to have y equals 2x. So you're going to plug in a 0. 2 times 0, that's just 0. Right? So the 2 times 0 gives you 0. What about a negative 4? Plug a negative 4 in. 2 times negative 4, that's negative 8. So out comes a negative 8. Plug in a 9. Plug in a 9 in for an x. 2 times 9. That's going to give you 18. So hopefully those skill practice problems were good for you. You can check those over. I'm going to move on to example number 2 in the book. We're on page 576, example number 2. This time, instead of saying y equals, I'm putting f of x. Right? You're welcome to just change it. Just cross it out, put a y if you want, if it makes you uncomfortable. But we're going to start using f of x because we're dealing with function boxes, right? Functions. And my function this time is that I'm going to take the x value, the input, and I'm going to subtract 2 from it. X minus 2. The right-hand side, that's your function. So I'm going to take y equals x minus 2, or just f of x equals x minus 2, and I'm going to start plugging in some numbers. How about if I plug in a negative 2? What happens? Plug a negative 2 in here. Well, then it would be negative 2 minus 2, right? If my function says plug in an x, then x minus 2. But what if my function said plug in a negative 2, f of negative 2? Negative 2 would be negative 2 minus 2, negative 2 minus 2. That could give you a negative 4. So I plug in oh, that should be a negative 4 here. Plug in a negative 4. Because this is wrong, right? Because that's wrong. That doesn't work. We're trying to get a 4 out. It didn't work. That's not good. It doesn't work. I remember this problem. Take a number 4. If you plug 4 in, 4 take away 2 is going to give you a positive 2. This one works. This one fits in our function. This represents the function perfectly. So this one's good. Let's put a little star next to this one. I like that one. That one's good. How about we plug in a 1? 1 take away 2. Well, 1 take away 2. Well, if I take a 1 and I take away 2, I'm going to end up with a negative 1. That's good because that's what I'm supposed to get. This point's in the function box. This one represents it well. But how about I plug in a negative 4? Negative 4 take away 2, that's going to give me a negative 6. But they said they wanted to see if it was going to be a negative 2. It's not a negative 2. That one doesn't work. So these, ow! That's stuck to my finger. If I plug in a 4, I do get the 2 out. If I plug in a 1, I do get the negative 1 out. These don't work. These aren't part of my function. They were not points on my graph. These are points in my function. They worked out well. So if I give an example over here with example number 3 on page 577, which says if I've got a function here that's negative 2x plus 5, what happens when I plug a negative 1 into my function box? Just insert a negative 1, right? So if I insert a negative 1, I input a negative 1. I exchange x, and I say, you know what I'll do is I'm going to put, instead of an x, instead of my function with an x in it, how about my function with a negative 1 in it? So put a negative 1 instead of the x. What would negative 2 times a negative 1 be? Well, negative 2 times a negative 1, that's a positive 2. Plus 5 would give me 7. So when I put in a negative 1, out comes a 7, like that. Then over here, when I plug in a 0, plug a 0 into my function right there. So plug a 0 in, I'd be plugging in a 0. Let's use a different color so we can see this, the contrast. If I plug in a 0 right here, then negative 2 times 0, my x value as an input is 0 this time. Negative 2 times 0, that's just 0. This just cancels out, and I get 5. So I plug in a 0, out comes the number 5. That would be my coordinate for that one. Do the same thing for my last one. It says, what if I have a function and I plug in the number 3 to my function box? Well, plug it in, see what happens. So plug in 3 right there. Negative 2 times 3, that's negative 6. Plus 5 at the end, that's a negative 1. So you plug in a 3, you're getting out a negative 1. I think you guys are beginning to get this. Function rules are really simple. They're really fun. Go ahead and try that homework and see how things go. Got questions? Ask me on Google Classroom.